God cut 8 covenanters with humans. Most people can only name 2, one with Noah, one with Moses. But 6 more shaped the entire Bible, and if you skip even one, the whole story stops making sense and starts feeling like a random collection of ancient rules. Today we walk through all 8, in order, start to finish, with the actual verses so you can check every claim yourself. By the end, you'll see one continuous story, not a pile of scattered old rules stitched together by accident. Let's start at the very beginning. The Bible isn't one book. It's a library of 66 books written by dozens of authors across roughly 1,500 years, yet it tells one story from start to finish. That story moves forward through a series of covenanters, which are just binding promises made between 2 parties, in this case between God and people. In the ancient world, a covenant wasn't a handshake. It was closer to a signed treaty, often sealed with a sign, a ceremony, or even blood. Each covenant in the Bible adds a new layer on top of the last one. Each one points towards something bigger coming later, even when the people living through it had no idea. Genesis holds the first 3, Exodus holds the 4th, 2 Samuel holds the 5th, Jeremiah predicts the 6th, and the New Testament shows it actually happening in real time. In Genesis chapter 1, God creates Adam and Eve and gives them a job right away. Rule over creation, fill the earth, take care of the garden he planted for them. This is sometimes called the covenant of works, because it's built around one clear condition. God sets a single boundary in Genesis chapter 2. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, God says, or you will surely die. Break that rule, and death enters a world that had never known it before. Adam and Eve break it anyway, tempted by a serpent in chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3 shows the fallout in painful detail, but God tucks a promise inside the punishment itself. He tells the serpent that one of Eve's descendants will crush his head one day, even as the serpent strikes his heel. That's the first hint of a rescue plan, buried inside the very first failure in human history. Theologians call it the proto-evangelium, a fancy word that just means the first gospel. Remember that line about crushing the serpent's head? It comes back later, in a much bigger way than Adam could have imagined. Fast forward to Genesis chapter 9. The world has become so violent and corrupt that the text says every inclination of the human heart was evil. God sends a flood but saves Noah's family and 2 of every animal on an ark built by hand. After the water finally clears, God makes a brand new promise to Noah and every living creature with him. Never again will I destroy all life by a flood, God says, and never again will a flood destroy the earth. The sign of this covenant hangs in the sky after every storm, a rainbow, visible to anyone who looks up. This covenant works differently than the first one made with Adam. It's unconditional, meaning it doesn't depend on humans behaving well or holding up their end of a deal. It covers every living creature on the entire planet, not just the people who believe or obey. God is showing something important here very early in the story. His patience outlasts human failure every single time, without exception. Genesis chapter 12 introduces a man named Abram, later renamed Abraham. God tells him to leave his home country, his relatives, and his father's house, and travel to a land he hasn't even seen yet. In exchange, God makes 3 specific promises that echo through the rest of the Bible. Abraham will become a great nation, with descendants too many to count. His name will be blessed, and it will become a blessing to others around him. And through his family line, all peoples on earth will eventually be blessed, God says in Genesis 12. In Genesis chapter 15, God confirms this with a strange ceremony involving split animals and a smoking firepot passing between the pieces, sealing the deal in a way ancient people understood instantly, even if it looks bizarre to us today. In Genesis chapter 17, God adds the sign of circumcision as a permanent physical marker for Abraham's whole family. This one covenant becomes the foundation for nearly everything that follows in the rest of the Bible. Israel comes from it. The promised land comes from it. And that line about blessing every nation on earth turns out to be Jesus himself, showing up quietly, centuries before anyone knew his name. Move forward about 400 years. Abraham's family has grown into a full nation, but they're now enslaved in Egypt under a harsh Pharaoh. God rescues them through a reluctant man named Moses, and leads them out through the sea to Mount Sinai. There in Exodus chapter 19, God offers a very different kind of covenant, one that comes with real conditions clearly attached. "Keep my covenant," God says, "and you will be my treasured possession out of all the nations, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation." The people agree together, saying everything the Lord has spoken we will do, without fully knowing what they're signing up for. God hands down the 10 Commandments on stone tablets, then hundreds of other laws covering worship, justice, food, and everyday life. This covenant works differently than Abraham's did generations earlier. Abraham's promise depended on God alone showing up and following through. This one depended on Israel actually obeying too, day after day. That difference matters more than it first seems. It sets up a pattern of Israel failing again and again, which quietly sets the stage for something new much further down the road. Skip ahead again to 2 Samuel chapter 7. Israel now has a king named David, a strong one who finally gives the nation some rest from its enemies. David wants to build God a permanent temple as a thank you gift for everything. God says not yet, but makes David an even bigger promise through the prophet Nathan instead. "Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me." God says, "Your throne will be established forever." Someone from David's family line will rule without interruption, permanently. At the time, this sounds like a promise mainly about David's son Solomon, and it partly was fulfilled that way. But it clearly points much further ahead than just one generation. Every king after David eventually fails, dies, or gets dethroned by an invading empire. The throne keeps getting interrupted, again and again, for centuries afterward. That's the tension this covenant quietly creates and never fully resolves on its own within the Old Testament. Where is the king who actually rules forever? Exactly the way God promised David. Centuries later, the prophet Jeremiah writes about a coming change that nobody living at the time was expecting. In Jeremiah chapter 31, God promises a brand new covenant, explicitly different from the one made at Sinai generations earlier. This time, God says, "I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts." The law won't sit on stone tablets outside a person anymore. It will be written directly onto human hearts instead, from the inside out. People won't just follow rules out of duty or fear of punishment. They'll actually want to obey, because it fits who they now are at their core. Fast forward to the New Testament and the night of the Last Supper. Jesus lifts a cup and calls it the new covenant in my blood, poured out for many, right there at the table with his closest friends. Hebrews chapter 8 connects the dots directly back to Jeremiah's ancient promise, quoting it almost word for word. Every covenant before this one was quietly pointing toward this exact moment in history. The serpent crusher promise back in Genesis, the blessing to every nation, promised to Abraham centuries earlier, the eternal throne promised to David through Nathan. They all land on one single person, at one single point in history. Here's why any of this actually matters for you, right now, today, not just for ancient Israel. These covenanters aren't dusty legal contracts sitting untouched in an old book. They're a pattern of God moving toward people, again and again, even immediately after failure. Adam failed in the garden within one chapter. Israel failed at Sinai before Moses even walked back down the mountain. David's own family failed repeatedly on the throne for generations. But every single failure led to a bigger promise, not a smaller or more limited one. Think about your own life for a second, honestly. Maybe you've broken promises to yourself more times than you'd like to admit out loud. Maybe you failed at something you swore you'd finally get right this time. The covenant pattern says failure isn't the end of your story either, no matter how it feels right now. It's usually the setup for a better chapter still coming. That's not permission to coast through life carelessly, expecting a rescue. It's a real reason to keep showing up anyway, one ordinary day at a time. People often ask if the old covenanters got canceled the moment the new one showed up. Not exactly, and this is where a lot of people get tripped up. The new covenant fulfills the earlier ones. It doesn't erase or delete them completely. The moral heart of the law still matters today, even in a different form. The promises made to Abraham still stand, completely unbroken after thousands of years. What actually changed is how people relate to God day to day. moving from external rules toward internal transformation. Here's another common question people bring up in the comments. Did Israel losing the land during the exile mean God simply broke his promise to them? The prophets are consistently clear that the judgment was temporary and painful, but never permanent or final. The promises were always going to outlast Israel's worst failures, by design from the very start. That's the entire shape of the covenant, from Genesis all the way through Revelation. God's faithfulness never depended on human performance staying perfect. So here's the whole list again, in order, from start to finish. One more time. Adam told to work the garden and warned clearly about death. Noah promised the earth would never flood again, sealed with a rainbow overhead. Abraham promised a nation, a land, and a blessing for the entire world. Moses, given a law at Sinai to shape a brand new fledgling nation. David promised a king from his own line who rules forever without end. And the new covenant, promised through Jeremiah and delivered through Jesus at a simple table with friends. 8 covenanters, one continuous story, building the whole way through, from beginning to end. You started this video only able to name 2 of them. Now you know all 8 and exactly how each one connects to the next. Go read Genesis chapter 15 and Jeremiah chapter 31 yourself sometime this week in your own Bible. Read them back to back and watch the entire pattern click into place. Then tell me in the comments which covenant surprised you the most and why. Subscribe for next week, when we break down what the new covenant actually changes about how you read the rest of the Bible.